What an ideal family. If we had kids, maybe we could have been like that, said my husband Wilson with a smile. His smile was soft, like he was looking at something precious. At first glance, Wilson, with such an expression, might seem like a kind person, but that's not the case. There's a little boy surrounded by his seemingly kind parents, playing happily. Sadly for that child, I'm about to destroy their happiness in a terrible way. But it's Wilson's fault. If there's anyone to blame, it's Wilson, who betrayed me cruelly. Their misfortune is all because of Wilson. My name is Anissa, a 43-year-old housewife. I live with my husband Wilson. We met through a friend's introduction. At that time, I wasn't particularly interested in romance, but Wilson approached me. Gradually, I developed romantic feelings for Wilson, and we started dating, leading smoothly into marriage. We didn't have kids. It's not a fertility issue or anything. Wilson was always busy with work, often away from home since the beginning of our marriage. There were times he didn't come home for days due to business trips, so we couldn't find time for intimacy as a couple. Surely having children would have let us experience the joy of a growing family. But we were happy, just the two of us. Even without children, being with the person I loved most was the greatest joy. I believed Wilson felt the same, yet I also harbored doubts whether it was really true. I didn't want to doubt Wilson, but he was incredibly busy. Another business trip? This is your third this month, and this time you'll be gone for a week? That day, Wilson came home from work and mentioned he had to go on a business trip. It turned out he had to travel far by plane and wouldn't be back for about a week. This was his third extended absence this month due to business trips. No matter how busy work is, there are limits. Lately, he's been working late every day. And as a couple, we barely even see each other. Wilson, it's just not normal to be this busy. Maybe there's something wrong with your company's work environment. You don't have to worry about our finances for a month or two, so why not consider a job change? At this rate, I'm afraid you might collapse, I said, worried about the frequent late nights and business trips that seemed excessive. It was clear that something was off about Wilson's company. I feared for his health and felt it was my duty as his wife to do something about it.
No, I'm okay. Work is tough, but I find it fulfilling. I'm sorry for leaving you alone so often, but my job is important for our life together, Anissa.
Wilson replied with a troubled smile. Work is essential for living, I know, but does he really need to work this hard? I started to doubt his words and the nature of his company. Was I wrong? Was his attitude typical? Did he really need to continue this job to support our household? No matter how much I tried to persuade him, he had no intention of changing jobs. So our situation remained the same, and the days went by. Our intimate moments were rare, maybe once a week if we were lucky. This has been our pace since we got married. Perhaps that's why we never had children. One day, Wilson managed to take a day off, so we went on a little trip to a shopping mall in the next town. Seeing families with children holding hands and playing made me sigh with longing. Wilson frowned at my sighs.
Let's not sigh on our day off. How about we grab some lunch?
He suggested. It was indeed lunchtime, so we decided on a nearby restaurant. It was crowded, filled with families. Children were excitedly choosing from the kids' menu, and one little one smiled happily while being fed a hamburger by their mother. Every scene of a happy family made me wonder why we didn't have children. Wilson seemed to have similar thoughts, watching the families and murmuring,
"Kids are so adorable. I wonder what our child would have been like."
His words pierced my heart. Maybe I was being too pessimistic, but it felt like a jab at me for not being able to have children. I wanted kids too. I wanted to build a happy family with Wilson, but his overwhelming work schedule was to blame. If he had switched jobs earlier, made time for us, maybe we could have been like those happy families. Realizing my selfish thoughts, I sighed again. It wasn't Wilson's fault. He was just trying his best to make a happy life for us. And yet, what was I thinking? Perhaps due to my distaste for my own thoughts, the food served didn't taste good to me. I think Wilson noticed and seemed displeased. Despite being out with him after a long time, I couldn't find joy in it. From that time, our relationship started to deteriorate. Unconsciously distancing myself from Wilson due to my feelings about not having children, I felt he was avoiding me too. I knew something wasn't right, but I didn't know what to do or why things had become this way. Unable to find answers on my own, I decided to confide in my friend Rylan, whom I've known since our student days. Rylan listened sincerely and empathized. "You're doing your best, Anissa," she said. But her words didn't lift my spirits. Seeing my state, Rylan looked somewhat bewildered and hesitantly said, "I was unsure whether to tell you this, but..." She then shared something that made me dizzy with disbelief. How could such a thing happen? If what she said was true, then Wilson? After talking to Rylan, I started keeping my distance from Wilson, haunted by Rylan's words. A few days later, I asked Wilson to go for a walk in a residential area. Suddenly, I blurted out, "I want to go for a walk." Wilson looked suspicious, but still he followed me, which was a relief. We passed by a certain house. From where we were, we could see its garden. There, a happy-looking family was having a barbecue. A little boy surrounded by adults who appeared to be his parents was playing joyfully. Wilson murmured,
"What an ideal family. If we had kids, maybe we could have been like that."
He looked at them with deep affection. To an onlooker, Wilson might seem kind, but the truth was different. Wilson and this family had a close relationship. The happy scene was undeniable proof of Wilson's cruel betrayal. That's why I had brought him here today. I was observing Wilson to see if he showed any remorse, but apparently he had none. If he was going to make life difficult, then so be it. It's not the child's fault, but it's all Wilson's doing. He's the one to blame. I decided to punish the traitors. "Yes, that's true, but it's your fault that they're going to be unhappy," I said, watching the happy family from afar. Wilson tilted his head in confusion.
"What?"
he asked. He seemed to pretend ignorance.
"What do you mean? I have nothing to do with them, right?"
I might seem crazy for bringing this up out of the blue, but I wouldn't inflict pain on unrelated people. They are suffering because they are related to this. Wilson's voice seemed slightly tremulous. He might have been taken aback by my sudden accusatory words. After all, he couldn't have known that I was aware of his actions. I felt underestimated. "Well, what do you think? Let's just go home for today. We don't need to be here anymore," I said, pulling Wilson's hand to start our way back. Wilson looked at me anxiously and said,
"What exactly is going on?
and
Why won't you talk to me?"
but I didn't answer any of his questions. Before, I would have consulted Wilson about any troubles, relying on him as a dependable husband. But now I understand it was all just a facade for our marriage. Upon returning home, we barely spoke. I had a casual dinner and then secluded myself in my room. Wilson seemed worried, but I ignored it. That night, I secretly left the house, while Wilson was sound asleep, likely unaware of my departure. I slipped an envelope into a mailbox at a certain house. This envelope was my final resort, a secret weapon. The owner would surely be surprised by its contents the next morning. It was all the fault of the betrayer. I was only imposing punishment for being betrayed. If the betrayal hadn't occurred, none of this would have happened. No happiness would have been destroyed. With each step, the realization of reaching a point of no return tightened around my heart. It's impossible to pretend like none of this ever happened. There's no going back now. The next morning, a Sunday, Wilson and I were having breakfast. He planned to leave for work, as usual. Then the doorbell rang early in the morning.
Ding dong! Who could it be at this hour?
Wilson wondered, rising to check the door monitor. His shock was evident.
"Why?"
he said. There on the screen were Oswald and Patty, the couple from the house we visited yesterday. Oswald, red-faced, spoke through the intercom.
"Sorry for the early disturbance. There's something I need to talk about. May I come in?"
Oswald then pleaded. Meanwhile, a pale Patty was trying to stop him, pleading. "Stop it, please. Let's go home. We shouldn't trouble these people." And she was making a commotion. It seemed Oswald had come of his own accord, and Patty was desperately trying to hold him back.
"Why are they here? What's going on?"
Wilson was clearly perturbed by their unexpected visit. Understanding the gravity of the situation, I nodded and opened the front door. "You saw the envelope, didn't you? Please come in. Let's talk face to face." As I mentioned that envelope, Oswald's eyes widened, realizing that the house I had visited late last night was his. Once I let them in, Wilson's face turned ashen with panic. Ignoring his state, I seated the couple and served coffee.
"Why?"
Wilson was still struggling to comprehend, while Patty was eager to leave, and Oswald, with resolute eyes, glared at both of them. The cast was now complete for an explanation. "Did you come because you saw this photo?" I asked, taking out the contents of the envelope from the cupboard and spreading them on the table. The contents of the envelope were the same as those I had put in the couple's mailbox the previous night. They were several photos. In each photo, Wilson and Patty were affectionately walking through the night streets together. They were having an affair. I came to know this after my talk with Rylan. "I saw Wilson walking arm in arm with a woman in the night city," she said. Initially, I couldn't believe Rylan's words. One night, while Wilson was in the shower, I checked his mobile phone left in the living room. The password was simple enough for even me to guess. Inside, I found exchanges between him and Patty. Apparently, they had known each other since their student days and were close before he dated me. They had grown apart when they started working, but reconnected at a reunion and began their affair. So, while in a relationship and married to me, Wilson was involved with another woman. This was unforgivable. I hired a detective agency to investigate them. Patty had had a child. In calculating back, it was clear the child was conceived around the time they took a week-long trip together. I had thought Wilson's absences were due to his busy work schedule, but it was all a lie. He was just spending time with Patty, returning home late or going on frequent business trips. Patty, likely to avoid suspicion from Oswald, used the same busy at work excuse to spend time with Wilson. So the child Wilson had lovingly gazed at was his and Patty's. They had plotted to conceal their affair by having Patty bear Wilson's child and raise it as Oswald's. As I explained everything, Oswald, red-faced with anger, grabbed Patty by the collar. "That's not true. This woman is lying. That child is Oswald's. I'm certain." Patty yelled desperately. But with the photos as evidence, at least their affair was undeniable. Oswald's rage didn't subside easily. "I'm divorcing you, and I'll demand compensation, so be prepared," he shouted. Patty, crying and pleading with him, "Wait," and "It's not true," seemed futile to me. Watching their argument, I glanced at Wilson, who was sweating with anxiety about what lay ahead. Of course, Patty wasn't the only one who had committed adultery. Wilson also needed to be punished. Oswald, seemingly content with his plans for divorce and compensation, sat back down, his anger still apparent, as to give me the floor. "Of course, Wilson will receive his due punishment too. What you did is outright betrayal, deceiving me for years," I said with a smile. When I first learned of Wilson's betrayal, I couldn't accept it as reality and prayed it was just a dream. But now, all I could think of was making Wilson suffer. At my words, Wilson's face turned pale and he fell to his knees. "Please forgive me. I won't deny I was involved with Patty, but my true love is you. Even when a child came into the picture, I never thought of divorcing you. I wanted to stay married. Being with you was all that mattered, even without children." Suddenly, Wilson started making self-serving statements. Patty's face turned red with fury. "What is that supposed to mean?" She lunged at Wilson in anger. Ignoring Patty, Wilson continued. "It was just a fling with Patty. I just succumbed to temptation. My only true love is you. I don't care about Patty or the child. All I want is to be with you." Normally, being told you're the only one I need by a loved one should be a joy. But I couldn't believe Wilson's words now. He had lovingly looked at that boy, showing undeniable affection. "You say the child doesn't matter, but that's a lie. You've always brought up wanting children. You've always wanted them, haven't you?" If Wilson didn't want children, he wouldn't have looked at them that way, nor would he have spoken of an ideal family. To Wilson, having a child must symbolize happiness. But between us, there was no child. Because for a long time, Wilson cherished his moments with Patty more than with me. "Truly, the child and her don't matter to me at all. All I need is you. Please, believe me." Wilson desperately denied everything I said. He clearly didn't want a divorce, likely fearing social condemnation and, most importantly, the scolding from his parents, who detest dishonesty and wrongdoing. If they found out, Wilson would be severely reprimanded, perhaps even disowned. "It's impossible. I can't believe you. Who betrayed and cheated on me for years? Who destroyed my trust and feelings? And despite not wanting a child with me, You went ahead and had one with your affair. How can I believe your feelings now? Let's just get a divorce. I can't continue as your wife anymore, I declared firmly. Wilson's face showed utter despair at my words. In the past, it would have taken immense courage for me to utter divorce. I loved Wilson that much. Yet knowing this, he cruelly betrayed me. Such a sin shouldn't be easily forgiven. Moreover, Wilson was even ready to coldly abandon his own flesh and blood. If he hadn't been so reckless, none of this would have happened. Abandoning a child just to save himself was unthinkable. Wilson needed to take responsibility as an adult. Therefore, I couldn't forgive him. He deserved to be punished, to face his sins, and ensure he never repeats such actions. Patty, red-faced with anger, was crying incessantly. Shrugging off her arm, Wilson turned to me, apologizing deeply, clinging at my feet, trying to hold on to me. Watching this, I sighed heavily, causing Wilson to shudder. But even then, I couldn't bring myself to forgive him. Eventually, we decided to divorce. Wilson was vehemently against it, leading to divorce mediation. With substantial evidence of his infidelity, the divorce was finalized with Wilson being at fault. Subsequently, I demanded a substantial compensation from Wilson. He ended up having to pay a significant amount. Naturally, this news reached my in-laws, who were furious. Wilson, unable to pay the full amount, begged them to cover it, but they refused even to let him cross their doorstep. Thus, Wilson had to take on debt to pay the compensation, and is now working tirelessly, day and night, to repay it. Similarly, Patty was also divorced, and is now back at her parents' house with her child. According to Oswald, her parents are extremely angry, and they've made her work relentlessly, devoid of any leisure, for as long as they live. Through this, I was able to properly punish Wilson for his terrible betrayal. Frankly, it was a distressing and exhausting ordeal. Yet I felt relieved, having delivered punishment for the betrayal that lasted for years. Since then, I've moved and am living peacefully in a new place. I often meet Rylan, who helped me during that time. It was really tough back then. We talk about it to this extent. After such a harsh betrayal, the idea of marriage is unappealing to me now. I plan to remain single for a while. I've started to think that living for myself is a valid choice in my life. From now on, I want to live for myself.